Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Respected brothers and sisters, it's an honor and a privilege to be with you all here today. We'll be discussing more to do with calculation today. As you know, this is a four-part series on zakat. Last week, I believe you were with one of my dear colleagues, Brother Iman from the Netherlands, who discussed about the reason why we pay zakat and the philosophy of zakat, the vision of zakat, and what zakat does for the economy, for the society, and for individuals. Next week, you'll be having, or very soon, you'll be having a very important session with another colleague of mine, Rizwan, who will be discussing zakat distribution impact measurement, which is more about how zakat is institutionalized and how zakat is operationalized. It's a very important discussion, and Rizwan is well placed to discuss that, given his number of years in managing zakat funds and overseeing impact measurement, zakat distribution at the highest level, and so he'll be discussing that. But today it's more to how do we go about our zakat payers, working out what's due upon us and fulfilling that command of Allah, right? So I guess the first thing I just want to touch upon as an intro is let's understand what zakah is again. Let's put our minds into that, back in that mindset of understanding what we're talking about. What's the bigger vision, the bigger picture here? Zakah is, although literally it means purification, growth, and blessings, zakah is much more than that, right? Zakah, one of the beautiful things about the commands of Allah is that every command of Allah has so many dimensions to it. It's multidimensional. It really is. And what do I mean by that? Zakah has so many meanings. It has so many benefits. It fulfills so many roles. So if somebody was to say zakah is for poverty alleviation, that's just one function, right? If somebody was to say zakah is there to purify the payer, that's another function. That's another benefit of zakah. But zakat does so many different things, and this is only possible because Allah is Al-Hakim, the wise. And whenever somebody or a being who's wise, then whatever they command and instruct, the injunctions, the instructions, the commands will be full of wisdom. And when it's Allah who is you could say wisdom comes from Allah. Allah is the one who's created and developed wisdom. Wisdom belongs to Allah, right? Then His commands, His instructions are full of wisdom, whereby zakah not only benefits the payer, it benefits the recipient, the society, the economy. So many different benefits, and that we would have touched upon last week. So zakah is a very powerful tool. It's much more than a payment online, and I'll discuss this when we talk about paying zakah, how important it is we understand what we're doing, and it's not an automated thing that we just do annually because we have to do it, right? I just want to touch upon why is it that the question people ask me all the time: why is it that Allah has made zakah obligatory, fasting obligatory, salah obligatory, Hajj obligatory? What's the purpose behind the obligations? Why has Allah made them obligatory upon us? Because look, think about it like this. In the world, if there's anything which is obliged upon us or made compulsory upon us, it's generally for the counterparty's benefit, generally speaking. So for example, tax is a compulsory thing, income tax. When you're earning certain thresholds, you have to stop paying tax. The idea is there to benefit the recipients, is there to benefit the government. It's a source of income for the government, who then allocate that tax and for public benefits and public services, and then the whole nation benefits. If it comes to something mundane or something so common as our COVID masks that we wear masks when we go outside. Why are we wearing a mask? It's there, yes, to protect us from others, but also to make sure that counterparties or anybody that we face is not exposed to anything that we may have. Okay, so it's there to protect the counterparty. When we come back from our holiday, somebody flies in, they have to stay in quarantine. What's the reason? Just to make sure that you're negative and you'll not be a risk to other people. So it's always with a view, when anything is obliged, made compulsory, It's with a view to protect other people. That's in the world. The question is, with Allah, does that principle stand? That when Allah has made all these things compulsory, and Allah is, so to speak, the counterparty here, because when we worship Allah, Allah does not need our benefit whatsoever. We know that. Allah does not benefit from our worship, from our iman, from our salah, from our zakat, our som and hajj. So does that mean these actions are done without any benefit? Right? Is that what it means? The answer is, of course not. Allah is Al-Hakim, all-wise. His injunctions are full of wisdom and full of benefit. Then who is the beneficiary here? We are the beneficiaries. Right? It's not Allah. Allah has made Iman, Salah, Saum, Hajj, Zakah compulsory upon us. Why? Because in these pillars and practices lies our ultimate salvation in the hereafter. So, out of the infinite mercy of Allah, Allah made those things obligatory upon us which will lead to our salvation. Because had it not been compulsory, had Salah not been compulsory, the question is, how many of us would perform Salah? If Zakat was not compulsory, how many of us would give some money in the path of Allah, in the causes of Allah? If fasting was a compulsory upon us, who would starve for one day? Who would, part from their food for the pleasure of Allah? How many of us? And therefore, when that's the case, we would be very detached when we know our weak states, right? We'd be very detached from these practices which naturally build fortitude, perseverance, awareness, recognition of Allah. Naturally, these actions have an ability, have this capacity, they're programmed to build within us the closeness to Allah, right? That's what they're there for. And naturally, it does that. When you fast properly, naturally, when you're curbing your desires for food and other things, it develops the ability to recognize Allah. When you're performing salah, it builds that humility and humbleness within you. And that is also a means to get close to Allah. So it is purely from the mercy of Allah that He has made these pillars compulsory upon us so that we can have salvation in the hereafter. Whereas Allah is not in need of any of this, right? And that's really the whole benefit of zakah. And that's what really zakah as a pillar, it's there ultimately to recognize Allah. Ultimately, yes, everything else is like a byproduct, and it's the mercy of Allah that Allah, as some of you might know, in the previous nations, when they had wealth to give in charity, or they had won spoils of war, that spoils and whatever they would gain would be consumed by fire. Allah would send a fire and be consumed as a sign of acceptance. But in this ummah, in this nation, Allah allows the funds to recycle and to circulate amongst the needy and the poor, and for the benefit of the people. So it's an amazing mercy of Allah. So the paying of zakat plays in multiple roles. It's a means of recognizing Allah, as I mentioned. It purifies your soul from greed and wealth from impurity, promotes the circulation of wealth, and more importantly, to understand its importance, these pillars, zakah and salah have been mentioned together 28 times in the Quran. Right? That just shows you how central and pivotal these practices are in our faith, and there's much more to it. All right, there's much more, and we can talk about the spiritual dimension, which is the end all and be all. Right, the end all and be all as Muslims is the spiritual dimension. Allah wants for us to be successful in the hereafter. That's the primary thing of life. Right, life is very short. It Nobody's guaranteed any number of years, in all honesty. And the Quran being a book of guidance, and these are all injunctions within the Quran. The Quran primarily is there for success in the hereafter. Like, how can you live this world in a way where you live in a state of submission to Allah and acknowledging Allah? That will make you successful. And then every other guidance is ultimately within that paradigm and that framework. So things to do with marriage, finance, things to do with looking after your family, being nice to one another. It's all there within this worldview, that all of this will help you achieve your ultimate goal in life, which is leaving this world in a state of submission. Just like how you entered this world, you leave the world, which is submission to Allah. Right. So now let's discuss more about calculation. Now, has to pay zakat? That's the first question, right? So whenever we talk about zakat and calculation of zakat, there's two distinct discussions. Number one is the criteria which make zakat compulsory upon a person. We have to understand those criteria. It's no point talking about the assets of zakat if we don't know what makes zakat compulsory in the first place upon a person, right? So we'll first discuss those points and those criteria which make zakat compulsory upon individuals, and thereafter we'll dive deep and look into the different assets, understand what they are and how zakat works on the different assets that are there. So, of course, number one, you have to be Muslim to pay zakat. A non-Muslim is not required to pay zakat. Why is that the case? Simply because, look, the non-Muslims, they're required to bring iman. As I said, the pillars of Islam are there to bring you closer to Allah. That's the whole point of these pillars. They're there to get you close, to make for Allah's love to increase in your life, for you to increase in your recognition of Allah. When non-Muslims, they don't recognize Allah at all, they don't believe in Him, then these pillars will play no function in that increase. They will not add any value to them because they do not have the first requirement, which is iman. They don't acknowledge the existence of Allah, and so there's no question of getting close to Allah. And so non-Muslims are not obliged to pay zakat whatsoever. Neither can, as a result, neither can they receive zakat. Zakat revolves around the Muslims, and it's there to support the believers in their faith. Number two, according to the Hanafi school, this is you have to be an adult, right? What we call being mature, being pubescent, being an adolescent, where you've reached the age of puberty, meaning salah is not compulsory upon you. Whenever salah becomes compulsory upon a child or a young teenager, then that's the same time when zakat becomes compulsory upon him. This is according to one view from the four schools of fiqh, which is a Hanafi school, and the other madhabs, the Shafi'i school, the Maliki school, and Hanbali school, are of the view that no, zakat is payable upon the wealth of children, regardless of the age, as long as they have all these other conditions in them. Zakat will be due on their wealth. Another condition, according to the Hanafi school, is a person must be of sound mind. He must be sane. He must have mental capacity. What that means is a person whom unfortunately is suffering from some illness, some weakness, and his understanding, his mental capacity is deficient, then zakah is not payable upon their wealth. If they don't understand, and many a times you know this when you look at your own, if somebody has a family member who has this condition, then they'll know that they're not in a position to understand what zakah is or even manage their finances. And such a person then is exempt from paying zakah. Of course, in the other madhabs, the Shafi'i, the Maliki, and the Hanbali school, such a person is still required, meaning his wealth is still zakatable, and it's his guardian's duty to calculate the zakat on their wealth and pay zakat, right? And then finally, you have to have ownership of nisab, meaning one of the key conditions is complete ownership. What do we mean? What do we mean by complete ownership? Is two. You must own the wealth that you will be paying zakat on, right? That doesn't mean you can't pay on your wife's wealth. You can do, but when it comes to an obligatory payment, zakat will only be due upon that wealth which is in your ownership. So if I have uh, custody over my friend's wealth, for example, he gave me £1,000 to hold on his behalf whilst we're traveling, and it so happens that my zakat year end came and it was time for me to pay zakat, I will not factor his £1,000 into my calculation because that is not my wealth. So I'll only pay zakat on my wealth. Now, wherever that wealth may be, right, whether it's digitally stored, whether it's physically stored, whether it's somewhere in a vault, wherever that wealth is, if it's zakatable wealth, it will be zakatable. Complete ownership, again, another element is possession. You must be physically in possession or constructively in possession. What we mean by that is you must have authority over that wealth. So investments come into this as well. You have possession over your investments through your fund manager. You've delegated possession to somebody to manage your funds on your behalf. So you still have possession and authority and control by activating that fund. And investments are the best form of zakatable investments are the best form of growth for your wealth, right? So these are the key requirements for zakat when it comes to the conditions of zakat. Then we'll touch upon nisab. We use the word nisab here. What does nisab mean? Nisab in the Arabic language just means threshold, and for zakat purposes, it just means that threshold, which is the minimum amount needed for zakat to become obligatory and payable by a person. Right? There's two nisabs. You have the gold and silver nisab. Why do we have two nisabs? Really, there's only one nisab, right? And that was the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He mentioned in the hadith in Sunan Abi Dawood, which is a famous collection of hadith. He mentioned two standards. He mentioned 200 dirhams and 20 dinar. Dirhams are silver and dinar are gold. And he mentioned this, but the ratio between the two, if you notice, is 10 to 1. And why is that the case? It's because the purchasing power of 10 dirhams is identical to the purchasing power of 1 dinar. Meaning, what 1 dinar could buy you, the exact same thing 10 dirhams could buy you in that society, in that economy, in that market. So therefore, if that's the case, really, in terms of value and purchasing power, the nisab is the same. It was just that some people had gold coins, some people had silver coins. But there's no discrepancy here between the two values. It's just depending on what type of coins and currency you had. Because remember, in the time of the Messenger of Allah, the bimetallic standard was being used as a currency. People were using gold and silver. And so this is why there are two nisabs, so to speak, but really in terms of value, it's one. Yes, of course, now with the um, shift towards fiat currencies and conversions and then inflation, fluctuation, prices, what's happened is that value between gold and silver, this ratio has completely gone. And therefore, right now, I think currently the ratio is over 100 to 1 as per my last calculation. So that's why there's two nisabs. When it comes to which nisab you should use, generally, scholars in different localities advise different things. So therefore, I would just say wherever your local scholar advises, then go with that. If you can use silver, by all means, you should then use silver just to be on the more cautious side. Otherwise, if you have local scholars who are um, advising for gold, then you're more than welcome to follow that view as well. Now, how does a zakat year work? Right now, this is the zakat year is, remember, zakat is payable once a year. That's why it's payable. So how does this whole cycle work? How does zakat function in terms of cycle? So before we look at the assets, let's just understand how it works in terms of payment, cycle, and obligation. So for example, remember zakat is paid on a lunar year. We use the lunar year generally. There is permission to use a solar calendar. The IOF Sharia standards have mentioned it specifically. And if a business was to use the solar calendar, then they would use 2.577% just to factor in the extra days that come in a solar calendar, right? So it's 2.577%. I would generally recommend people to stick to this lunar calendar. Why? Because we don't have much touch with our heritage, and the Islamic calendar that we have, it's something we should keep in touch with. There are sacred months in there. One way to keep in touch with this is through zakat, understanding zakat and using the Islamic calendar. It will keep us in touch with our heritage, and things that happened historically in these months will be more aware and conscious of those events. So a person here, as you can see on the screen, um, he had wealth. If this line is the nisab, just for argument's sake, we've kept it static. Really, the nisab fluctuates, right? But for argument's sake, just to make it easy as an example, it's static. It's 214 pounds. This person, he wasn't. He never had a nisab in the beginning in this month in Jumad al-Ula, but then in Jumad al-Thani or Jumad al-Ukhra, right? Uh, he has wealth more than the nisab, the threshold. The black line is the threshold. He has more than that. So that activates his year, right? His year begins here. So now he'll pen this date down, whatever it is, right? The first of Jumad al-Ukhra or Jumad al-Thaniya, right? And then you see throughout the entire year, his wealth has stayed above. No problem, right? Generally, when it comes to the Hanafi school, and there's a few differences amongst the different schools here, but the Hanafi school has this view that fluctuations really don't matter in the year. As long as your wealth doesn't hit zero, if your wealth goes above the nisab or below the nisab, it doesn't matter. The Shafi'i school is of the view that fluctuations do matter. If wealth goes beyond or below the nisab, that will reset your entire year. Okay. So in this scenario, here we are. This person, it's the start of his year. Uh, what will he do? He'll wait until Jumad al-Thaniya comes again. Jumad al-Ukhra comes again. And because he still has wealth over and above the nisab on this live nisab of that date, right? So it's a live nisab you're looking at. You're not looking at historic nisab. You're looking at live nisab every time. And for argument's sake, it was £214 again, which is rarely the case, but just say we've kept it static here. He'll now be required to pay zakat on his full that he has, the cash that he has, not just the amount above the nisab, rather his entire zakatable assets here. So he has £300 as we can see. So he has to pay 2.5% of £300, which is £7.50. Right? So he won't pay 2.5% of the nisab. He'll be paying 2.5% of how much he has. Okay. So that's one scenario. Another scenario, look what happens here. In this instance, his wealth is going up and down. He started with below the year. His year began here, Jumad al-Thaniya again. But come at the end of the year, he has less than Nisab. And therefore, as you probably all know and guessing right now, Zakah is not due because his net worth is below the threshold. And therefore, this year is no longer applicable. He'll no longer be required to pay Zakah. He will wait now until the next time he has zakatable assets equaling the nisab, and he'll start a new year, a new cycle then. Right? So in this scenario, nothing for him to pay. However, what if he hits the minus and goes to zero and minus? Then in that scenario, he had more than nisab here. His wealth decreased. He had some heavy expenditure, and come Muharram, and he was in the minus. He was negative. That will cancel his year altogether. And therefore, if he had any previous year, for example, his year was Jumad al-Ula, he will not use Jumad al-Ula as his year. That's been cancelled because he hit zero. Rather, what will happen is he'll wait for the next time to hit the nisab, and that's when he will become a nisab holder, and that's when his new year will start. Right, so he'll now start a new year from this date, which is at the end of Rabi'ul Thani, or in the beginning of Rabi'ul Thani, right? That's really where it's supposed to be. And his year will begin from there, right? Not from Rabi'ul Awwal, because he had less than Rabi'ul Awwal, Rabi'ul Thani, right? That's when his year will begin. So that's the whole, and those are the conditions. So now let's move on to the actual calculation. What is the process of calculation before we look at the assets? All we have to do for zakah is add up the value of your zakatable assets. That's one. Number two, deduct those debts which can be deducted. And number three, you work out then the net. What is the difference, or what's the sum? And then you pay 2.5% on that. That's all you have to do. That is the zakat process. Adding, subtracting, working out what it equals, applying 2.5% on that. Some key principles for calculations to keep in mind. Zakat is not only paid on wealth that you have saved or kept for a full Islamic year. Right? It's not necessary to hold or save that. Right? It's not necessary. It's paid upon the wealth that you have at present. Whether even if you earned it, for example, you gained that wealth 2 days ago, but as long as you are equal or over and above the threshold, you'll pay zakat. Okay, so it's not like income tax either. Zakah is not due upon income per se. It's on retained unspent wealth. That's how zakat differs from taxation, where it's generally based on income and revenue. Up here, it's more about the unspent and unused portion of wealth, zakatable wealth that you have with you. It's like a snapshot. That's what we call a snapshot and balance sheet. It's not an income or cash flow related. We're not looking at cash flows here. It's just looking at what's your current financial well-being. What's the current status? Are you eligible to pay zakat? Are you well enough? Do you have sufficient funds for zakat purposes? Yes or no? That's what we're looking at. C, it's an individual obligation and should be calculated individually. What do we mean by this? I shouldn't, if me and my family we're all paying zakat, I shouldn't be applying my debts and liabilities onto my spouse, onto my children. That's for my calculation. So what you should do is do each person's calculation individually, and then yes, it can be that the husband, the wife, or whoever takes responsibility to pay everyone's zakah. That's not a problem, right? You can all do it, and that's how it should be done. It's important to go through the calculation process formally and not just guesstimate from the outset. That's very important because zakah is, as I mentioned, it's a one of our core pillars and requirements of faith. We have to be careful that we do it properly. We can't just guess in these things, and that's why it's so important. These workshops and seminars and courses are extremely important. And Alhamdulillah, may Allah reward you for taking that time on a Sunday to sit and learn about zakah, a pillar which clearly shows you how important you're taking it. And may Allah reward you all, because this is purely from the mercy of Allah that He has given us an hour. He selected us for this hour to talk about knowledge. You know, the hadith mentions that man salaka tariqan yaltamisu fihi ilma sahalallahu lahu tariqan ila al-jannah. That whoever treads the path of seeking knowledge, Allah will make it easy for him to enter paradise. Another hadith mentions that the angels spread their wings for the seeker of knowledge. So we have full belief, whilst we're engaged in this, we are seekers of knowledge, of Islamic knowledge, of traditional knowledge. And Allah's, the angels have spread their wings out for all of us. That's our belief. The Messenger of Allah said this. In fact, the hadith mentions that even the fish in the sea, they make dua for us, for the people who seek knowledge. So this is a very blessed hour that we're involved in the day. Seeking knowledge is extremely beneficial. Being involved in knowledge is one of the best things a person can do in his life. Right? It's one of the best ways to attain paradise and attain the pleasure of Allah. So let's look at the zakatable assets. Step one: cash and liquid assets. Okay. Of course, everything cash is zakatable, whatever it may be, wherever it may be, whichever currency, fully subject to zakat. So whether it's the pound, dollar, a euro, dirham, dinar, rupee, whatever it may be, it's all zakatable. Of course, interest, riba, is not zakatable. So in fact, you have to give 100% away from the riba. So if any Muslim, unfortunately, for whatever reason, accrued some interest earnings, and of course we believe every Muslim knows that interest is unlawful, but for whatever reason he was stuck in a situation and he received some interest. In that scenario, what he should do is give away all that impure income, completely disassociate yourself from the riba, because that attracts the displeasure of Allah, and we don't want to do anything or have any association with funds which are displeasing to Allah. So we'll get rid of the interest immediately. When you go into charities and you make this payment, be sure to put this interest in the riba category, because riba has different ways it can be spent. Yes, it's given to the poor and needy, but it can also be used for other things, and therefore we should select riba, right? And always, when it comes to zakat, always make sure you put it in the zakat category, nowhere else, because zakat is very specific to specific categories. Gold and silver. Gold and silver, according to the Hanafi school, it's zakatable in whichever form it may be, regardless whether it's an ingot, a brick, jewelry, whatever it may be, it's zakatable. According to other schools, so the Shafi'i school, the Maliki school, the Hanbali school, they're of the view that when it comes to gold and silver, if it's personal jewelry, zakat is not due upon that, right? For personal jewelry, it's only due upon that which is either excessive or it's in investments, right? You've invested in gold or holding it for investment purposes. That's when zakat is due upon gold, but it's not due upon jewelry. When it comes to mixed metal, so for example, you have white gold or you have a 12-carat ring, then zakat is still due upon whatever portion of gold that's there. According to the Hanafi school, of course, when you're talking about jewelry, zakat is due on whatever portion. So if it's 9 carats, you'll pay zakat on the 9 carats. How do you do that? Just work out the price per gram for the 9 carat of gold, right? So that will reflect the value of gold, and just pay zakat on that. So you have 20 grams, you multiply by 20 and pay 2.5% of that. Which price do you use when it comes to gold and silver? You can use a scrap gold value, which is like the second-hand gold value. you are not required to use the live universal prices, which are for new gold, because that's generally at 2, 3, 4 pounds higher than scrap gold. So if you go to a jeweler, they'll give you the scrap gold, the buy how much they'll buy your gold off you. That's what you need to factor in. What's the worth, market value of your gold? So you can do that, or alternatively, you can go online, and there's websites which offer scrap gold values. They do offer, so you can get that online to get the scrap gold value. Business assets. When it comes to businesses, uh, again, a business has generally the following items, right? Cash, receivables, and inventory. Those are the key zakatable assets in a business. What are business assets? It's exactly what in accounting terms what we call inventory, right? Anything bought to resell. That's what is a business asset. That's what we're considering. Now you can be a property trader, you can be a trader in land, you can be a trader on the financial markets. If that's your business, meaning that's how you're earning, that's your means of income, where you're buying and flipping different assets, financial instruments, whatever it may be, for a profit, and that's your business. That's not you're not treating it as an investment, rather it's like a business that you do on a day to day. Then that's zakatable fully as your business, right? If it's a long term investment, we'll discuss that later, right? In the next couple of slides. But we're talking about here as a business. So if there's a property developer, property trader, whose business is to develop and sell property, and he would account for his property as an inventory on his balance sheet, that also is his business asset, and zakat is payable upon that property or land, whatever it may be, annually at its market value, because that's his business. So zakat is due on business assets from that angle, where it's those things purchased to resell with capital gain and profit. Things in a business such as goodwill and other intangibles, property, plant, equipment, and other fixtures and fittings, these things are not zakatable. Any income generating asset which is not for trading purposes, not for selling, is purely just assisting you, like your software, your laptops, your computers, your shelving. These things are not zakatable. Okay? So it all comes down to intention. What makes a tradable asset? Anything you bought to resell, it's an inventory from accounting, but even from zakat purposes, it's the idea is to sell that on. If it's inventory, you're buying to sell, it's zakatable. If it's not inventory, you've not bought to resell, rather it's a long-term investment, or it's another store of wealth. For example, I know, look, fiat currency is depreciating in value because inflation has increased tremendously. There's much more quantitative easing, much more money is being printed, and therefore a basket of goods now in this year will have increased significantly compared to last year. So I don't want to keep hold on to fiat currency in my bank accounts because it's just being eaten away. It's eroding in value. So what I do is I transfer that into property or land, not with the intention of selling that. Rather, I've just transferred it. I've bought a property as a store of value and store of wealth. There'll be no zakat on that because I'm not earning rental income. I've just bought another home, right? It'll be considered to be just your personal belongings, personal wealth. That's all. I'll just change the form just to hedge against, right, and mitigate the inflation risk that exists within um, fiat currency. So I've just converted the asset. That's all. But zakat will not be due upon this because it's not a buy to sell, or it's not my business. It's purely there as now a store of value. Rather, it's just it's a long term investment in that sense. But it's not. I'm not even earning rental income on it, right? Yeah, if I was earning rental income, then zakat will be due upon the rental income only, still not on the property. And that's why, as we just discussed, when it comes to property, a residential property is not zakatable. Neither the house you are renting out, except the surplus rental income. So it's the surplus, whatever's remaining, the net, the unspent amount. That's why you'll pay zakat on in terms of rental income. That'll be just added to your cash and be part of your cash holdings. Um, However, if you're a trader in property, it's your business, then you will pay zakat on the full value of the property. Shares and unit trusts, equity investments. When it comes to equity investments, again, the same principle applies. If a person's business is buying and selling, he sits daily or takes out time to buy and sell to capture some small profit, or however big, from the price movements of equities. and that's all he's doing. He's buying. Clearly, I'm just looking for the right time to sell, or I want to sell. It's 100%. That's the intention. I'm just looking at the markets. Then he's a trader. He's a trader. He's not doing it for investment for growth purposes. It's not a long-term growth portfolio. It's purely just trading. Yeah, it's like day trading, so to speak. But of course, as we know, day trading. Many scholars are of the view that when it comes to day trading, swing trading, where it's before T+2, before settlement, it's not Sharia compliant because you are not the owner of record. You still don't have liability for the underlying, and that's necessary when it comes to trading. So you should have liability for the underlying investment. But if a person just say buying and selling and his view within the short term, he wants to sell. Clearly, that's his only thing. It's like a business where he's doing to sell flip for capital gain purposes. Then zakat will be due upon that full amount, the full investment. However, if it's a long term investment, which means it's for growth purposes, or you've invested through a robot advisory firm or platform, you hold equities in your portfolio, but again, it's for growth purposes. It's not for uh, buying, selling, and making small returns immediately. Then zakat will be based upon the underlying zakatable assets in the company, in the equity. Now, for most people, this becomes very challenging. How do you work out the underlying zakatable assets? Those who have no financial background will find this challenging. So, what we did at the National Zakat Foundation was we did a research. We looked at the FTSE 100, and we realized that 66 companies out of the 100 had net zakatable assets below 25%. And therefore, if you use 25%, we have full or very strong confidence that your zakat liability will be absolved, and inshallah you'll have met your zakat liability for your equity investments. Of course, any dividends will also be zakatable as cash, right? So you can use that 25% proxy. And if you want to know more about that, how that works, you can just Google this online. The entire research is available online. When it comes to pensions, this is a more challenging one. Uh, so your national insurance, for example, in the UK, you have national insurance or you have state pensions elsewhere, which is like a compulsory deduction. You have no ownership of those funds, but the state gives you a stipend or a monthly kind of income upon retirement. Zakah is not due in the duration of the invest or in the duration of you working and making contributions to national insurance or the state pension system or whatever it may be in whichever country. Every country has some differences in how it operates. Like some countries call it a provident fund, right? There's different terms, but generally the idea is the same. Then in the UK and especially in other European countries, you have two types of pension schemes. You have the final salary, which is really a type of defined benefit scheme, right? There's two types. You have career average and final salary scheme. Final salary and career average are just a formulae which are used to work out the benefits you'll receive upon retirement. So that's defined benefit schemes. There is no zakat due upon that either because you don't own the underlying investments, you don't bear the investment risk. Rather, it's just a sum that's owed to you as deferred income, right, from your employer. The third type, which is zakatable, are money purchase schemes, which are really known as defined contribution schemes as well. Zakat is due upon them. How do you work out zakat on that? That's where it gets more challenging. When it comes to defined contribution schemes, we need to look at the underlying fund, what it's composed of, because they'll be composed of equities, of commodities, of property, of some will have bonds if it's non-Sharia compliant, fixed income instruments, marketable securities. These are all different asset classes found in pension portfolio. So what we did at the National Zakat Foundation was we connected the research. We looked at the 100 top pension funds of each type of fund. So uh, we looked at funds for direct property. We looked at funds of equity funds. We looked at Sharia funds. We looked at mixed asset funds, and we looked at um, income bond, fixed income, and bond corporate bond funds, right? And we worked out another proxy for people to work out. And I don't have these proxies in front of me on the screen, just because I always encourage people to go and find. You can go to the National Zakat Foundation website, nzf.org.uk, and find the entire research there and the proxies. You can Google this and it'll come because there's a lot of information there to digest. And also on the NZF website, the calculator that we have for zakat, that automatically applies the proxy that you have, right? So if, for example, you want to work out zakat on your property or property fund, which is 15%, by the way, that's the proxy. You can go on the calculator and automatically it'll apply the proxy there. So if you put in £1,000 as your pension in a property fund, 15% will automatically apply to that. Only £150 is zakatable from there. Likewise, the Sharia fund is 26%. The equity fund is 27%. Mixed assets are 50% zakatable assets, and the bond and fixed income, which is not Sharia compliant, of course, is 100% because it's all loans which are outstanding in the fund. Money owed to you, if money is owed to you, money is of two types: loans and uh, outstanding invoices for credit sales. Right? So you've sold part of your business, you sold something, then zakat is due on these two things. But you have an option. You can either pay zakat whilst outstanding, or you can wait until you're repaid, but then retrospectively pay every single year. Right? So that's the option. So these two receivables are zakatable. When it comes to other things, for example, loans advanced without any hope of repayment, you gave a loan to somebody and that person's run away. You don't have to pay zakat on that anymore because you've lost all hope of any repayment. You have outstanding invoices for the sale of personal items. I sold my house, my residential home. The person still has not paid me. Or I sold a car. The person still hasn't paid me. I do not have to pay zakat on the outstanding amount. Wages, fees, remuneration of services are not. Whilst it's outstanding, no zakat is due. Mahar owed to the wife. A sister got married. She's owed. The husband promised her £10,000. He's not even paid her £500 yet. She will not be obliged or required to pay zakat on the 10,000 yet. Inheritance shares, the probate period has not come to an end and the shares have not been distributed. Zakat will not be due upon the outstanding inheritance. So, look, we talked about assets. What can be deducted? Very easily, anything which has been incurred, which is incurred and it's been expensed, you now need to, and it's payable. It's payable now or within next 12 months. You can deduct this, right? So, for example, I bought something and I have like a 12-month installment plan. I can deduct the 12 months worth of installments. Um, my council tax, because remember, council tax, how it works in the UK anyway, is you will be billed for the full amount, but this the council make it easy for you to pay monthly. You can pay have a 10-month plan or 12-month plan, uh, and that's whatever's easy for you. But you can also make the full payment, so the entire amount is due to be billed. You can deduct the entire amount, right? For long-term debt such as mortgages or student loans, right? If a appears student loans really is debatable in a sense. I'm not talking about Sharia compliance, but even in terms of its zakat treatment, because that is deducted at source. It's deducted from your income. It's not a matter of you having to save up and then deduct, um, or it's not part of your wealth and then you're paying off. But this is one view of scholars that they permit up to 12 months worth of capital repayments. Likewise, mortgages. So if a Muslim, unfortunately for whatever reason, um, he had an interest-bearing mortgage, which lasts, as you know, 20 years, 25 years, then a person can deduct the capital repayments only, the non-interest portion, for 12 months. If you have an Islamic mortgage, which is usually done through a diminishing musharaka or an ijara structure, whereby you're making monthly rent payments and acquisition payments, you can deduct the 1 month's payment as due, only the 1 month, because that's a liability. The future liabilities will not be deductible, the future sales, so to speak. So that cannot be deducted at present. So this is the calculation then. Assets minus liabilities equals net zakatable assets. That's how it all works. That is the calculation. Um, and that is a zakat calculation, in all honesty. And just to finish off with, the last slide is who can you give zakat to? Um, it must be a person, a qualifying Muslim, not from the Prophet ﷺ's family. As we know, the hadith prohibits zakat being given to the family of the Messenger of Allah. Rather, we should honor them with sadaqah. Right? You can't give zakat and spend directly on mosques, schools, hospitals, and burial expenses. You have to give zakat in the ownership of a needy person. You can't give it as wages or remuneration for any work that's carried out, and it cannot be given to one's lineal ascendants and descendants or one's wife. Right? You can give it to your brother or sister. And that's the end of our presentation.